I was born and brought up in the UK, but I whakapapa back to India. That's where my ancestry is. And then I moved to New Zealand when I was about 15 and kind of bounced between New Zealand and the UK ever since. So did my studies in New Zealand, went back and worked in the UK for a bit, and moved to Canterbury about 10 years ago now. So I'm coming up to my 10th year in Canterbury. So I'm a bit of a mix of everything at the moment. Growing up in the UK in the 80s was a pretty rough place at times. There was a lot of racial tension there, especially with people from India. And so you kind of learnt to be as English as possible to avoid the beatings and to defend yourself sort of thing where you could.
Yeah, and tell me about those beatings. How did they happen, and what usually triggered them?
I know that I've been in plenty of fights, on a almost daily basis sometimes with just regular bullies. And if it's not because you're brown, it's because you're too fat, you're too tall, you're too skinny, whatever else it might be. But there would always be a racial part to those fights as well. There would be slurs thrown out and things like that.
What kind of society did you envisage when you shifted here?
Honestly, I had no idea what I was coming to. Really had no idea what to expect. And to be honest, I kind of was expecting something similar to what I had in England, far less physical. I don't think I got into many, if any, fights in New Zealand at all. And it was very different that way. Doesn't mean there weren't other issues that are involved, but nothing to the same level that you might have found in some parts of the UK where I was, or other parts of the world, that you see some really violent, vulgar stuff happening. What we do see, or what I have experienced in New Zealand, is much more that casual racism. But I get these weird sort of comments that people make that they think is a compliment, or they're looking to make a connection, and you're kind of like, well, that's a weird thing to say.
Like what sort of things?
There's assumptions that you're Indian, therefore, all right, so which fish and chip shop do you own? Which dairy do you own? Which petrol station do you own, sort of thing. And this happens, not just as trying to make a joke or anything. People genuinely think that's it. You kind of also get the people who say, wow, you're such a credit to your race. Or, I had someone say to me that I'm a fantastic example of what a white education can do for a brown person. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I know this is meant to be a compliment, but it's kind of like that doesn't make me any less brown. And doesn't mean that you necessarily have to say that. You would never say that to a white person or anything like that.
Now, how long have you been teaching for?
Oh, Lord. A long time. So I left industry and came back to academia, in 2004? So 2004 to 2019. So, over 10, 15 years or so, I guess. I've always loved to get up there and corduroy, which is very different from where I was as a young kid in the UK. Very shy kid. Didn't really enjoy the limelight sort of thing, try to keep my head down. Now I'm quite happy being in front of a crowd and talking about what matters to me.
There is a bit of an uglier side to that, isn't there? And you know what I'm getting to.
Yeah, sure.
And, tell me about that feedback that you get.
Sure. So with most lecturers around the world, you will get these anonymous teaching surveys where students fill out what they like and dislike about you. And I've been very fortunate. I've been very privileged that students seem to like my style and they seem to enjoy it. But there's always the occasional one student that will feel like it's time to be a bit edgy. And I remember it vividly because it was the first class I ever taught at Canterbury. And the question was, what's one thing you would change to make this class better? Or something like that. And the student just wrote his ethnicity. And I cracked up laughing. I thought, welcome to Canterbury. Welcome. I'd been warned about this place. And I showed it to my head of department at the time, thinking this was hilarious. He was mortified.
Do you think if it happened now, post what happened here in Christchurch, that you would have a different outlook to it?
It's hard to know. There's a real level of experience difference between people both pre and post March 15th. There are many people out there who are like, yeah, this is awful, this is horrific, no one's going to argue against that, but a lot of people kind of saw this sentiment bubbling up and they saw this sort of tension happening, and it was going to explode at some point in some form. And I don't think anyone ever imagined this was the way it was going to happen. But they saw this sort of sentiment coming and existing within New Zealand as a whole, but also much of the Western world.